Dobar dan i dobrodošli na konferenciju Medijska pismenost i borba protiv dezinformacija u vreme pandemije. Moje ime je Tina Cvjetićanin, ja sam ovde ispred organizacije Zašto ne i stranice Raskrinkavanje BA, koji su suorganizatori današnjeg događaja. Na početku imam velike čast i zadovoljstvo da najavim obraćanje gospodina Jozefa Borela, koji je visoki predstavnik Evropske unije za spoljnu politiku i sigurnosnu politiku i potpredsednik Evropske komisije. Gospodin Borel nam se neće obratiti uživo, ali ćemo čuti njegovu pozdravnu poruku putem snimljene video poruke. Nakon njega obratit će nam se Johan Sattler, visoki predstavnik Evropske unije u Bosni i Hercegovini i šef delegacije Evropske unije u Bosni i Hercegovini, a zatim ćemo čuti Darka Brkana, predsednika organizacije Zašto ne, koja je ispred mreže SEECheck i Raskrinkavanje.ba organizuje ovaj događaj u saradnji sa asocijacijom srednjoškolaca u Bosni i Hercegovini i uz podršku delegacije Evropske unije u Bosni i Hercegovini. Pa da poslušamo poruku gospodina Borela.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends, I am pleased to welcome you to the first edition of the European Union Western Balkans Media Literacy Conference. The European Union is a union of values and principles, and today you will discuss important principles which are at the core of the European Union and the European Union integration. Media literacy, youth empowerment, the strengthening of civil society, and media freedom. These principles are also essential for fighting disinformation, a global challenge and a threat to democracy. Misinformation and disinformation proliferated in the Western Balkans, in the European Union, and in the whole world during the pandemic. This has been dangerous for all of us. Above all, because lies about medical issues can even kill. We have to engage globally to counter disinformation, to identify sources of disinformation, and to provide citizens with reliable, accurate, and timely facts. Work is needed to protect and promote fundamental rights, such as freedom of expression and media pluralism. During this crisis, fact-checkers and media organizations in the Western Balkans, and many of you are present at today's conference, debunk fake news, expose disinformation trends, and inform citizens. Fact-checking organizations link up with partners in the region, work across borders, and team up with organizations in the European Union, and made an important contribution to the public debate. This, your work, does not to go unnoticed. It empowers people and the youth to speak their minds and to become agents of change. It's great to have many young people who are at the forefront of digital transformation. With most of today's participants being from the Western Balkans, let me conclude by saying what I have underlined several times before. The European Union is not complete without the Western Balkans. And I want to thank all of you, and specifically the organization, Why Not, from Bosnia and Herzegovina, for co-organizing today's conference together with our European Union delegation in Sarajevo and the External Action Service, STRATCOM, Western Balkans Task Force. I wish you a fruitful discussion and a good and productive event. Thank you.
Čuli smo poruku gospodina Josefa Borela, specijalnog predstavnika Evropske unije za vanjske poslove i sigurnosnu politiku, a sada ćemo čuti obraćanje Johana Sattlera, specijalnog predstavnika Evropske unije u Bosni i Hercegovini i šefa delegacije Evropske unije u Bosni i Hercegovini.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dame i gospodo. Very good to be with you this afternoon, and it's always nice, of course, to speak after the boss. But it's even nicer that the boss took the time, Mr. Borrell, to record this video message. This shows the relevance and the importance of this very topic we are discussing here today. As HRVP stressed, the need for urgent action has ever been more apparent since the pandemic changed our reality, highlighting, among other things, the paramount importance of sharing accurate information. This, as Mr. Borrell said, is now, in times of pandemic, a question of life and death. Early in the outbreak of the pandemic in BIH, we observed the fast-spreading disinformation and conspiracy theories on everything from the origins of the virus to the ways to treat it. And I remember vividly when we were sitting in Sarajevo and and looking at those crazy videos, which were especially in the beginning being spread from doctors with long names, titles, and important looking auras, which were spreading incredible and totally irresponsible content. This has also, thanks to you, to the fact checkers, to the work on the ground, this has been changed, and there's much less of this out there now. In this context, I'm also very happy that the EU office in BIH has taken the lead and co-organized this first EU Western Balkans conference to educate the audiences and highlight best practices from the region. It's great today not only have people from BIH, from Sarajevo, from Banja Luka, but also from all over the region. And I want to thank all of you for joining us here today. For a few years now, we have been working closely with the fact checkers community in BIH, who are at the very heart of the global fight against disinformation. A year and a half ago, with EU support, this community produced great research that helped us better understand the nature and the scale of online disinformation in BIH. What we learned from back then is still valid today and very likely relevant to the other countries in the region. And these are some of the lessons from this research we have been doing. The first one is a need to ensure a clear understanding that fact-checking does not diminish, but strengthens free speech. This is a very important point, there has been a lot of debate about that. Secondly, tackling disinformation is impossible without educating the public, and especially young people. We are currently working with Why Not Association, is an NGO, SEECheck, and the BIH Association of High School Students on empowering youth actors across the country by teaching them to recognize disinformation and avoid spreading it further unwittingly. Finally, the systematic and orchestrated dissemination of disinformation cannot be addressed simply by calling on the public to be vigilant. It has to be tackled through targeted measures involving the authorities as well as regulatory bodies, fact checkers, civil society, and independent media. In the case of BIH, such cooperation, and I think I can not only this does not only go for BIH, such cooperation must be very much strengthened, and this is still a very long way to go. The objective is to protect freedom of information and freedom from disinformation, and to uphold truth, democracy, and freedoms that are at the heart of the European project. And this is where I want to come to an end, and wish you all the best for this afternoon, for your panels, and I'm very much looking forward to getting the conclusions and the readout from this conference. Once again, a big thanks to the organizer, to SEECheck, to Sarajevo, and to all the panelists who have joined us from all over the region in this important conference this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Sattler, I will now introduce Darko Brkan, who is the president of our organization, Why Not, or Zašto ne, and he will also introduce our first panel for this conference.
And now I would like to give him an opportunity to introduce us to the conference. Darko, the floor is yours.
Dobar dan svima, dobro jutro onima koji nas isto tako slušaju iz drugih krajeva planete i isto tako i dobro večer.
To everyone who is listening to us from all around the world, and maybe there are some who are coming actually listening to us from the past open, of course. We are actually
Zašto ne i raskrinkavanje pitanje medijske pismenosti i dezinformacije je jedno od ključnih pitanja kojima se bavimo, kao i za regionalnu mrežu SEECheck koja je u cijelom regionu se bavi ovim pitanjima. Samim tim je ova konferencija značajna iz više razloga. Putem želim upravo da se zahvalim partnerima na asocijacijskih školaca u Bosni i Hercegovini, Evropskoj uniji, Evropskoj delegaciji u Bosni i Hercegovini, kao i ljudima iz Western Balkans Stratcom Task Force-a koji su nam pomogli da zapravo sastavimo prvi panel koji će ići na 10 izlaganja. Zašto je nama ovo bitno? Nama je ovo prvenstveno bitno zato što nam je konačno omogućilo da se bavimo jednim jako bitnim pitanjima, to je medijskom pismenošću mladih ljudi u Bosni i Hercegovini, koja mislim da je ključno pitanje za budućnost, odnosno za kompletan medijski informacioni sektor u Bosni i Hercegovini regionu. Kroz ovu inicijativu koja je dio i ova konferencija, mi ćemo ući u škole u Bosni i Hercegovini, raditi sa srednjoškolcima i u krajnjem slučaju početi jedan proces koji se nadam se da će biti dugotrajan, to je da ćemo na neki način pomoći tome da mladi ljudi u Bosni i Hercegovini se bolje informišu i da kvalitetnije dobijaju informacije iz medijskog sektora. Osim toga, što je treći panel konferencije, danas bavit ćemo se i pitanjima politika, pitanjima toga na koji način se boriti na institucionalnom nivou, ovim pitanjima na koji način se ljudi koji se bave provjerom činjenica, odnosno fact-checkeri bave time, na koji način se time bavi naučna zajednica, te na neki način zaokružiti danas cijelu konferenciju upravo ovim pitanjem kako informisati mlade, odnosno kako pomoći mladima da se nauče kako da dođu do informacija. Kroz sve to će se protkati aktualna tema pandemije COVID-19, koja je nekako centralna tema svega što se tiče medijske pismenosti dezinformacije ove godine, a u krajnjem slučaju i svih naših života. Da ne bih previše dužio, pošto imamo danas jako dugu sesiju, odnosno dugu konferenciju, da najavim prvi panel. Imamo nekoliko izuzetnih govornika, njih će predstaviti moderatorica panela Jelena Berković iz Fonda faktografa iz Hrvatske. U svakom slučaju, dobrodošli, dobro jutro, dobar dan, dobro večer, još jednom i hvala vam što ste prijatni.
And thank you for being with us in the conference.
Halo, 1-2. Nadam se da me čujete. Hi, this is Jelena Berković. Thank you, Darko, for introducing me. I must say, for introductions, it's a great honor to be a part of this event with this very agile community. In this Brussels panel, for starters, we have representatives both from the institutions, from journalism, and from the think tank community. I must say that we are all here needed to discuss and to work together for the goals that have been set by Darko at the start of the conference. So let's start with introductions of who we'll have a chance to hear from. For starters, we have Ms. Radmila Šekerinska with us, Minister of Defense of the Republic of North Macedonia. She's going to be live from Skopje. Welcome. We have a recorded message from Mr. Tonino Picula, a member of the European Parliament. And he is not able to join us live, but he will receive the messages from the conference afterwards. We have journalists represented here by Miko Salo from Helsinki, from Faktabari. And Gerakina Tuhina from Brussels, working as a journalist of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, as well as Radio Television of Kosovo. And last but not least, with us, we have Anna-Katarina Messmer, who is a digital news and information literacy expert from the think tank Stiftung Neue Verantwortung from Berlin. So we have asked our panelists to prepare relatively short messages within up to 10 minutes as introductory speeches. I must use the moderator power to ask to stay within the 10 minutes or even shorter if possible, so that we would have chance for questions from the audience in the last few minutes of this panel. At exact time planned, we will be going to the next panel. So let's start now with Ms. Radmila Šekerinska, who will hopefully be speaking about her experiences in North Macedonia, experiences in the South Eastern Europe on the whole, perhaps about the main actors of disinformation, and perhaps about expectations that both North Macedonia and Southeastern Europe have from the European Union in the upcoming period. So, Ms. Shekerinska, please take the microphone.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a subject where both journalists and we politicians can talk in length. I'll have to say that I'll try to draw the picture on disinformation or misinformation, not only focusing on the period of the epidemic, but actually having in mind our experience in the last few years. But I'll start by saying that disinformation and misinformation have been an element of politics from as long as it exists. So this is not, in theory, something new. I have started my political life back in the 90s, and I have had my share of disinformation used against me. And I think that we have learned how to cope with them. The problem is that with social media and technological advancement, the speed of technological change, this has become a completely new global and regional battleground. And if disinformation would have been used to kill a certain person's career, now they can be really used to practically target a state, a region, an institution, even free media as well. And I think that this is why they're becoming a source of many of the conferences and the discussions that we are having. And let me use two examples from North Macedonia why this is different to what we have seen in the past. 3 years ago, we have had a very difficult political protracted crisis followed by elections. And we were finally able, through the normal political process, to change the government and restart our country. And just as we were trying to get the election of a new speaker in parliament and a new government dedicated to restoring democracy in the country, you have all seen the pictures of something that was considered not only unacceptable, impossible, even for a country like today's North Macedonia. That was the storming of the parliament, which was conducted by a combination of criminal gangs, people who have lost their political agendas, but an attempt that was fully organized by the structures of the previous government. And they did not only pay people for violence, they also incited the violence by spreading a very systematic campaign of disinformation that practically, if the government changes, the country will cease to exist. And this was the emotion that ran through the crowds that were organized to practically commit murder and to prevent a peaceful transition in government. So as I say, in the past, lies were used to destroy someone's career. In this case, lies were systematically, with the support of social media, with the support of several traditional media, were used to destroy practically democracy. And it was much easier because disinformation was spread speedier, it was spread through a more systematic manner and by using all the available platforms. The second example happened 1 or 2 years afterwards. North Macedonia decided after these elections that it wants to go back to the track of belonging to a democratic and Western world. So we, in a way, brought back the ideas of NATO and EU accession to the center of our political debate. And it was clear that in order to have some progress on these two fronts, we will need to come up with a certain kind of solution of our problems with two of our neighbors, Bulgaria and Greece. Many people were very skeptical that this is feasible. But the moment when we started showing some signs of a U-turn in politics, and the moment when it became clear that there is a potential for compromise on the table, both with Bulgaria and especially with Greece, this is when we saw practically a full-fledged operation of disinformation and accusations that was oriented against the possibility of a Prespa agreement. And I can come up with many stories about this, but in a nutshell, there was a very synchronized attack by nationalists both in North Macedonia and Greece, but also by some additional political forces in the region and globally to undermine the possibility of a compromise by spreading lies and by spreading this sense that you will be tricked eventually, and that every compromise today will end up in disaster tomorrow. This was a very difficult period for our country, especially because all these campaigns run on very strong emotions. Emotions connected with identity, with language, with human rights, and just debunking them is not enough. Because even when some of these stories proved to be completely untrue, the leftover was already influencing our public opinion. And this is generally the problem. It is so easy to conduct, I would say, this kind of offensive activities based on disinformation that practically you are wasting your resources when you try to fight them back. What we have seen, especially afterwards, was that this campaign was extremely focused against our desire and ambition to join NATO. And there was absolutely not even an attempt to hide this. So, for example, we have been practically surrounded by different kinds of lies with every exercise military that we would have here in our country. There were not rumors, but direct lies that the military exercises that we are conducting together with the US have used depleted uranium, that this is creating long-term damages to the nature and to the local population. And it came to us as a surprise because most of these issues were considered to be a source of consensus within the country. We have always had more than 90% of support for NATO membership. We have always had very strong support by all the political actors in the country for EU accession, strategic partnership with the US, and for the military. So this came as a surprise, and realistically speaking, it harmed us because we were not prepared. And this is, I think that based on these two examples, I think that we have drawn some lessons as a government. We have discovered that the first target or the first casualty of the misinformation campaigns were actually two: the institutions, with the attempt of undermining confidence, general confidence in the institutions. And the second was also free media, because all the professional media were actually the biggest enemy of those who were operating in the domain of false information. And I think that they have really believed, they knew that once the media is muzzled and the independent institutions are abolished or weakened, then it is easy for illiberal political structures, populist structures to take over and make the transition to an autocratic leadership that we have seen in the country. So what we have used as an instrument was going on two tracks. The first one was basic security measures, which can work up to a certain point, more secure protocols for communication, better platforms, empowering the institutions to fight back in a way. But the second was actually more important. It was a number of proactive measures with which we wanted to actually strengthen the confidence that our citizens have in their institutions and in their democratic process. So I really believe that the only strategy that can work is to lead, to inform, and to correct. And it is not a bulletproof strategy, because as I said, every lie is stronger than all the information that we share with the public. but it is the only immune system that we can create in our democratic societies. So, for example, speaking now not only as a member of the government, but as a Minister of Defense, our strategy, because we were the targeted institution, we were seen as the institution in charge of NATO's accession. The tool that we have used was to increase transparency, not to hide away as a result of the pressure, but really to increase the available information, to increase practically all the numbers when it comes to expenses, when it comes to the implementation of our budget. And we have managed as a ministry, which is traditionally not the champion of transparency, we have managed to move from, I think, the 45th position in the country, 45th institution in terms of transparency, to the most transparent institution in the country in the course of 3 years. And we have seen this as one of the elements with which we can fight back with some ammunition. So I do believe that the challenges will not disappear. On the contrary, I fear that these kinds of challenges will only grow in time. In my view, as countries from this region, who are usually on the front line of global competition, we have to be prepared even more and even better. As they say, history punishes strategic frivolity. And this is true for the countries in the region. This is also true for the European Union. And this is why we have been extremely open with our European partners in asking for some of their assistance in the strategic communication, in looking at our process of EU accession through the lenses of empowering institutions and also limiting the scope, limiting the space for potential attacks. I do believe that we will continue to live in a world that is dominated by this problem. The world is not just rapidly changing, it is practically being completely reshaped, and none of our institutions, not even the political parties, our behavior, our ethical standards are reshaped based on this change. In my view, I think that we will learn by making a lot of mistakes, but definitely having the same interconnection among the countries of the region, the institutions, the professional media, having some basic trust that we have to protect democracy is a must. And I end with this note: it is not only about disinformation, and it is not only with honesty that we can fight this back. Many people have spoken about media literacy. We are planning on introducing some media literacy content in our education. In my view, this is just a small piece of the iceberg. We are talking about the need to invest more in our public education. We should be talking about our need to strengthen our middle class. And if we want to target and if we want to deal with these issues, it is not only about investing in our defense capabilities, it is also about discussing and solving issues such as inequality, poor services, lack of confidence, especially among young people in their country. We have lost some of our best and brightest, not due to misinformation, but due to missed promises and missed opportunities. So now, maybe under more difficult circumstances, we will be able to fight back in a smarter and more focused manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shekerinska. Speaking from the, Northern Macedonia can serve to all of us perhaps as a pioneer in the fight on disinformation, and perhaps we can learn quite a lot from your experiences. We will have speakers further along to give us their experiences on how to strengthen media literacy. But in the meantime, let's hear a message from the European Parliament, specifically from one member of the European Parliament, Mr. Tonino Picula, who is speaking from an institution that has just started a special committee on foreign interference in democratic processes and in the EU. And we'll mention how sometimes in Western Balkans, it is the political elites that are part of the problem. So here's his pre-recorded message.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to address the first edition of the European Union Western Balkans Media Literacy Conference. I'm sorry for not being able to connect directly and fully participate in this major event discussing issues that are at the core of preserving and building democratic societies. Europe and the whole world are facing an unprecedented crisis. COVID-19 pandemic challenges not only our health and economic systems, democracy is at stake. The flow of disinformation around this crisis has been unprecedented. Let me use an example. European Union clearly and correctly supported societies inside European Union as well as externally, in particular and first of all in the Western Balkans. The EU took some days to react, this is true, but EU support is undeniable. However, the information about the EU did not flow as our aid. Disinformation did flow. Over the past months, we have witnessed an incredibly high number of disinformation regarding EU undermining its action, solidarity, and support. The other dominant stream of disinformation was questioning science and undermining health authorities at the detriment of citizens' health. What was noticeable was a clear intent to destabilize societies and portray democracy as a system unfit to deal with crisis. This flow of disinformation coming from external state actors, in some cases, showed itself locally in complex interlay of external and local state and non-state actors. Uninformed citizens often help disseminating disinformation content. Conspiracy theories, disinformation, and info operations are nothing new. What is new is the method of dissemination that is digital, global, direct, and instant, and it requires us all to consider how we consume media content, what kind of information we are getting, from which sources, with which aim. Over the last 5 years, European Union has set out and is implementing measures to address disinformation. The EU has been working on improved detection, analysis, and exposure of disinformation. It has set up a stronger cooperation internally between member states and its international partners. It has enhanced collaboration with online platforms working for the institutions of the Code of Conduct with world high-tech leading companies to tackle disinformation. And last but not least, European Union has been working to raise awareness and improve societal resilience inside and outside the Union. As of last week, I'm proud to share with you that European Parliament has started the work of the Special Committee on Foreign Interference in all democratic processes in the European Union, including disinformation. We will step up the work of the EU in this field, and we will work closely with and for the Western Balkans. The best practice from our member states show that in order to create societies resilient to disinformation and other hybrid threats, both public institutions and civil society need to do their part of the job. Civil society, fact-checking community in the Western Balkans in particular, has done an important work during the crisis, and they deserve our full and continuous support. In some parts of the Western Balkans, they have been working in very difficult circumstances. What we have observed is that in some areas of the Western Balkans, the political elites opened their dominant communication channels to the narratives undermining the EU help and misinforming about EU handling of the crisis. Too broad brush must not be used. This was not the case across the entire Western Balkans, as government-enabled communication about the EU aid was different in Belgrade and Banja Luka, for example, in comparison to Skopje, Podgorica, Sarajevo, Tirana, and Pristina. It has been a difficult time for fast-checkers but also for the professional, independent media who lost their sources of revenues during the crisis. I am pleased that the European Union managed to help in many cases, helping quality journalism to survive the pandemic. The importance of media freedom became even more obvious during the crisis. We could clearly see how without independent and professional media, democracy gets distorted, elections become pointless, and fight against disinformation becomes less effective. So we need to do our best to provide adequate both policy and financial support to facilitate the functioning of independent and professional media practicing quality journalism. In parallel, we in the European Union and our Western Balkan partners need to work together to advance the level of media literacy, which proved to be an effective vaccine against infodemic so far, which is exactly what we are doing today. I would like to thank the organizers for gathering us all here today at this event that I'm happy to support, and I wish you many useful exchanges today, and I'm looking forward to reading main takeaways from your discussions. Thank you.
Hello. Hello again. Hopefully now we can hear the studio from Zagreb. And I'm calling the studio in Helsinki, where we have Miko Salo. Hi, Miko. Hopefully it will work that you can turn yourself on, your mic on, and we can hear you. Miko is a journalist working in Fakta Body, correct me if I'm wrong, and also providing media and information literacy in Finland. They are great experiences that we can learn from in their fight against disinformation, as well as other information disorders in Finland. Please spread the word, spread the knowledge. We would like to make our own mistakes, not to repeat yours. Please go.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm really happy to contribute. First, I could probably start a little bit with my background. I'm not exactly a journalist, but of course, fact-checking is very much associated to that one. We started 2014 on fact-checking the European elections first, because there was a lot of nonsense going on at that in Finland. Then we kind of gradually went to training the journalism schools, so that the journalists would get back to the one that they would need most, so the fact base, and finally, then as the disinformation came more and more vivid in the social platforms, then we have pretty much focused on that one, while kind of getting to the schools. And this is something that I probably want to share with you, because that's where I think we have the biggest potential. This all in the context that I have a chance to visit the Western Balkans now like 3 or 4 times the last 2 or 3 years. And I have to say that our realities are somewhat different in regards to disinformations and the starting points. And Finland is luckily one of the most stable countries in what it comes to the institutions that was talked here. And this is, of course, something we should really preserve at the moment and strengthen, because that is exactly what the disinformation tries to kind of play down and create confusion. Our recipe in Finland, okay, that's a big topic, has been the kind of, we have a very holistic concept for security. So it really starts from the state level and all the, let's say, military security side, but everybody is somehow involved and everybody has their role, and we still can exchange and change best practices, so to say. It might not be exactly the same, the histories are different and all that, but perhaps we can kind of offer you some sort of role model to get into that type of directions, that you have to dialogue. We have a common, let's say, enemy, somebody that confuses the public space and makes our societies very vulnerable as such. But outside that, as I said, the starting point of a media sector that is still relatively well preserved compared to what I've heard in Balkans. You have serious problems with the funding and the independency of the media and all that type of things that I am, of course, very worried as well. But where we might give some sort of role model is the education system, and there it really has to start from the scratches. It needs to start from the curricula. You have to empower the teachers. I mean, that's how you can kind of really get the next generation growing without being completely manipulated in the internet. And unfortunately, that is very easy at the moment. I encourage you to look at the new film made, it's circulating in the Netflix at the moment. It's called Social Dilemma. And it explains how let's say, mixed up our information systems and the structures at the moment. We have unfortunate cases that it's been so very easy to confuse that debate in the case. There are some familiar cases to the Western Balkans that how it's been profited as such, but at the same time it explains that there is an awareness on that type of things. But this is like where it all kind of starts in the social networks, and I think that's why it's so important that the EU is finally doing something about it and is serious about that one. Outside that, what we have done in Finland, we have kind of tried to raise awareness of the problems and the biases of the internet, because that's where the youngsters are, that's where everybody is to some extent. And this has actually led pretty much in the last phase to empowering people to take care of their privacy. Because the biggest challenges, as I see them, are the micro-targeting. And I mean, that's how you get really to the bottom of the things. I mean, that's how you can kind of make me believe that, you know, I'm living in this fact-checking bubble and all that, and this is the reality, and it's not. And this is especially important in times of COVID, when we are all stuck in our home and we don't really have a feeling what's happening in a bit more balanced world, where we can still trust our family and friends and discuss things and don't get emotionally taken away, as it's very easily in the social media. So if there would be something, I would try to get that one as early as possible. We really started first like the future voters, 16 years old. But personally, the more and more I believe in it, we should start very early, as soon as the people get their first mobile device. And because that's where the kind of the information flows comes to us, and we have to be somehow prepared. And this is something we are only working on it. We call it a digital information literacy, and we are very happy to share that one later when we get further. And we really very much believe also the engagement on the public for contributing to the news cycles, because that's how you understand that how the real journalism is done. And it's not whatever like a storytelling in the networks or something like that, but it's a really hard work going to the sources and challenging your opinions and all that. So practically it's just slowing down. We know that there are differences. Finns are known for social distancing, you know, even without the COVID times, and not being the super emotional. That helps us, that gives us the resilience, that gives us to kind of cool down, observe things, check the sources, check the facts without making anything, because we are, so to say, at the moment, products in the internet for the advertisement world, and unfortunately some third countries and some internal factors are practically using it to manipulate our reality as such. But perhaps with this gloomy but positive in the way that if we start early, if we get youngsters to care about the future and be aware of these biases, then we could probably mobilize something or some sort of sustainable solutions after all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mikko. So these are very important lessons to be learned. Start at the earliest age, if I understood it well, not necessarily with robotics and stuff, but literacy, especially regarding privacy, online privacy. It's never too early, it seems, to start with that. So we go now to multi-annual journalist working at the moment in Brussels and reporting on European issues for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty and Radio Television of Kosovo. Jarakina Tuhina is with us, and she's witnessed quite a few changes on European continent in her working period. So that right now we have Radio Free Europe reopening in Hungary. And when we talk about Western Balkans, we see quite a lot of media that are not necessarily trustworthy or free. What is your take on it? Disinformation is promoted by politicians and misused for political purposes. This is what you witness. Would you mind explaining a bit further on how it works?
Yes, Hungarian service is back to RFE after almost 3 decades. Ironically, Western Balkans aspires membership in European Union, and once you are allowed to get in, that means that you have a free society, free media, and no issues with rule of law. But once you're in, it's a bit difficult to be disciplined and to maintain those key values of EU, and Hungary is not the only one that has been returned to the RFEA headquarters. We have 2 other EU member states, Bulgaria and Romania, that have been back providing news information, although Hungary is a more specific topic, but I'm sorry for this kind of diversion. Speaking of freedom of media, I don't think that Western Balkans lacks freedom of expression because we have wide range of digital space in this, but we lack accuracy. Media are in crisis in Western Balkans. The crisis was present even before COVID, and it has become very serious during COVID. Why? Because main media live or exist thanks to marketing, thanks to advertisement. Advertisement is linked to businesses, businesses are linked to political structures. And this is this vicious circle that is very obvious in the Western Balkans countries. There are all relevant documents of European Union that even question the ownership of various media in the Western Balkans. Many of the countries don't even reveal the ownership of these media, and we always have the same continuous issue of accuracy. The biggest problem is that those people who are responsible for lack of media impartiality are main interlocutors in Brussels. These are people who are leading those countries. And during COVID times, we have even witnessed how the paradigm of disinformation was used for domestic political agenda. Mr. Picula recently just mentioned metaphorically that European help was different, transmitted in Belgrade and Banja Luka, and totally different in other capitals of Western Balkans. Why? It's because the airplane with Chinese aid, Chinese masks that were sold, for example, in Serbia, an airplane was paid by European Union, was welcomed by head of state of Serbia in the airport. And there were billboards around Serbian cities thanking Chinese aid. And of course, the Serbian citizen would think that the donations from China was much greater than donations from European Union. In this context, European Union is winning the war but losing the battle. Why I'm using this reverse sentence is winning the war because EU is there for Western Balkans. Even in the biggest crisis, health crisis, the modern humanity has seen, in the biggest economic crisis, EU was generous enough to offer donations to all Western Balkans countries. Nevertheless, this was somehow invisible because they didn't put the message through appropriately. I had recently in May held some kind of workshops with journalists in Kosovo, Kosovo Albanians and Kosovo Serbs. And to my question, who was the biggest donor in your country? Kosovo Serbs for Serbia unanimously said China. Some Kosovo Albanians even mentioned United States of America, but none of them unanimously didn't mention that European Union was the biggest donor in these months of COVID crisis. I come from Kosovo. In my country, in the height of the crisis, editors of media were not sure which headline goes first. We are talking about a period when every headline in every media, they had Corona and COVID-19 in headline. Why? Because we are the only European country that toppled the government in the height of the crisis. Exactly by using some kind of wrong information. I don't want to use the disinformation as an expression, because the people that wanted to get in power said that this previous government was in isolation. We are talking a period when the whole world was in isolation. And the same narrative goes on even today. The narrative that new government took out the country out of isolation. Taking out the country out of isolation meant as of end of June, when airplanes started to fly and people who could go and visit various European capitals. This is where we are focused now on the issue of fact-checking and professional journalism. I belong to the old school journalism, where fact-checking was done in newsroom, where you should be the credible one, not the first one. I know that social media makes this impossible, but we should still insist in going back to the traditional way of reporting, to tell to the people that there is a thin but somewhat significant line between journalists and citizen journalism that can put us 150 characters in the Twitter account. Let us not be case studies for fact checkers. This should be our aim as journalists. Let us be the ones to be fact-checking ourselves in the newsrooms, because before our stories went through several hands, several eyes before it was published, because we know that we bear the responsibility of the information that we produce. So how to mitigate the fake news? By promoting and by investing in professional journalism. It is a long shot. It is a very difficult battle, but it is not impossible, because we still have people who are really dedicated to continue and to work proper journalism. And if there are other journalists, there are young journalists over there, I mean, do not be posters. Do not be posters in front of someone by holding a smartphone. Be someone that will be remembered by the work that you've done, not someone to be remembered by your photos on your social media. I am, for example, a person who has several accounts in social media, but I'm not that kind of active. And then I have the honor to participate in this conference. I might sound romantic, but I gain my visibility without my photos. This is something that lives longer. And I would really love if young journalists really start to believe that by dedication and by working accurately, although it doesn't pay a lot nowadays, it is something that will live forever.
Thank you for this very frank and emotional discussion. It really makes sense to strengthen proper journalism, whether it's in the old school way, traditional news media, or whether it's in new media that are starting up anyway, such as Raskrinkavanje Ba and others in the Southeastern Europe, in the SEECheck network. So for all of these changes and upgrades, we need sustainable policy solutions. We wonder whether the EU is doing enough and what its plans are for the next year. So maybe our next panelist might give us some hope from that direction. Coming from the think tank, Stiftung Neue Verantwortung from Berlin, Anna-Katharina Messmer is the digital news and information literacy expert. So she will be speaking to us about citizens' literacy, how it should be raised and how it can be raised, what the youth are doing today and what their appropriate skills for the future should be. And then perhaps in the discussion later, we might discuss about official European plans regarding Digital Services Act, European Democracy Action Plan, and other systematic and institutional solutions. But so far, Anna-Katharina, please share your experiences and research on literacy.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm trying to share my screen with you now, because I have a very short presentation with me. So I hope you can see it now. Does everything work? Can you give me a heads up maybe? Thank you so much. So I'd like to start with a question today for you. And the question is, when was the last time you scrolled through a social media timeline and you took enough time to think about each and every post you saw and to classify like each post, text, picture, video, and you asked yourself what kind of information it is? Is it like raw information? Is it entertainment? Is it an advertisement, opinion, or maybe disinformation? The first time I did that, I realized how much invisible cognitive work we do actually every day, just incidentally, by just using our smartphones. So one of our main challenges in the digital public sphere is something we call incidental news exposure. Digital environments are becoming increasingly integrated into people's daily routines. So most of the time when people, for example, pick up their smartphones, they do not actively seek news, but use it for communicating with friends, listening to music, or using social media. And as you can see here, for example, this is the youth study for Southeast Europe by Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. But using social media, though, has more become something like a leisure activity as well. But even when individuals are not motivated to seek out news, they are exposed to news, for example, due to their sharing activities, the sharing activities of their contacts, due to sponsored posts or algorithmic content curation. And of course, all of this is also true for incidental disinformation exposure. So the challenge we are facing is people are exposed to news as well as to disinformation when they are like distracted and not in a state of mind, for example, for critical thinking or processing complex information. And platforms, to be honest, do not help us with this challenge. Actually, as Miko Salo already mentioned, the opposite is true. They are distracting us even more, and at the same time, all different pieces of information come in the same shape and in the same design. So this information is only like the tip of the iceberg, and there are a lot of underlying challenges. And that's why we decided at Stiftung Neue Verantwortung to broaden our view and to focus on digital news literacy. And we define it as follows. Digital news literacy encompasses a fundamental understanding of the importance of the public sphere for democracy and how this public sphere functions. The willingness to stay informed about politics, as well as the technological, social, and cognitive abilities to find, identify, analyze, verify, evaluate, develop, comment on, and share information and news in order to be able to participate in digital publics as a citizen. And to make it more tangible what this means, we developed a news literacy model of 6 skill sets you can see here. Because to be digitally news literate today means we need the different skills of actually 6 experts. Some of them you know already, or you hear it already. We call them the digital navigator, the journalist, the fact checker, the debater, the communication scholar, and the citoyen, which is a French term for a citizen who is driven by a high political and societal compass. And let me briefly introduce these experts to you. The digital navigator is the one I already mentioned. It's the first skill set. It helps us to navigate through the digital public sphere and to classify quickly what the main purpose of the different pieces of information are. So for example, to classify if a TikTok video is entertainment or an advertisement, or if a politician's tweet is neutral information or a political expression. And what can help us here is further information given on the platform directly, such as labels for verified accounts, advertisements, or for tagging disinformation. When it's necessary to dig deeper, it's the journalist skill set that will help us to assess the quality of a news item or the reliability of a source. And therefore, the media environment can be relevant, but it's also the content itself. Because actually, on the one hand, articles on a news site can be disinformation or misinformation, while on the other hand, Twitter threads or YouTube videos can provide reliable news. So one question is, for example, whether all necessary information is given, for example, in a tweet, or another question, which is especially important when it comes to disinformation, is if an article is written in a strongly emotionalizing manner. But if the information provided by a source is insufficient or the source itself is unknown, the skills of the fact checkers can help. And what we can learn from fact checkers is mainly lateral reading, which means one leaves an app or a website and opens a new browser tab in order to use the resources of the internet to learn more about a site, a source, or a topic. And this is also, as already mentioned, important for the public discourse because detecting disinformation prevents people from sharing it. And this is where the debater skill set comes into play, because one skill is, for example, don't forward unchecked messages from unknown sources, even if it's funny or outrageous, because your online behavior actually shapes the news environment of other users. And this means to understand one's own role in the digital public sphere is an important skill. And it is something we can learn from communication scholars who also teach us the basics of the media system, as well as the technological background of algorithms. And now, take a short breath. Because at first glance, all of this may sound quite familiar, and at the same time, it sounds like quite challenging. And actually, it is. So let me introduce one last dimension, which is quite often implicitly addressed in debates about media literacy, but not explicitly named. And it's the political dimension of the citoyen. And that is less a skill set and more a mindset. And it includes a basic understanding of the importance of independent journalism for a functioning democracy, as well as trust in democratic institutions. And therefore, this dimension is much more dependent on the national and the political context. And in our German concept, it includes trust in political, media, and scientific institutions. But we are well aware that these institutions are not inherently trustworthy. So being a citoyen includes also skills like critical thinking. So what do we need policy-wise? First of all, Mr. Salo already mentioned it, and I would support that. Since school is the place where we educate responsible citizens, we need to revise school curricula for digital news literacy. This includes teaching the skills I just outlined, and a good formal school education also includes promoting skills like tolerance for ambiguity, curiosity, and exploratory spirit, because this is a good way to foster immunity against disinformation and conspiracy myths. Secondly, we need programs to educate adults. It's hardly surprising this research shows that it's mainly older people who share disinformation the most, since adults grew up without learning media literacy in school. And last but not least, when we talk about educating the future citizens of the EU, when we talk about trust, it's also important to have trustworthy institutions. So for me, it's critical to mention that digital news literacy is not a one-way street. It's not something we can just impose on the citizens. It is also important for social media platforms, for political unions, for political governments, and for journalists to be trustworthy. And for example, by working together with civil society institutions, by creating transparency, as Ms. Already mentioned, and by not sharing and spreading disinformation. So thank you.
Thank you, Anna Katerina, and thanks to all the panelists. Hopefully you can hear me well, and Hopefully the organizers of the event will allow us for one single question in the end of this panel. Do have in mind that there will be some reports written after the event, and perhaps you might want to use as panelists this last question, short answer, to send a very precise message to those listening in European and other institutions who need to be making decisions in order for the changes that we want to happen. So we were talking about spreading disinformation on purpose or not by political and other actors across borders and beyond communities. What would be your final messages to those who are making decisions in European Union level? Please, panelists, go as soon as you are ready to provide an answer. We might start with Ms. Radmila Shekerinska, who is hopefully still with us.
I'm here.
And we can hear you. Please go. And then I will ask Jerakina to continue.
I was also intrigued by one written question here about small web portals that serve to promote a certain political career idea and attack other ideas. It is so present these days in all the countries in the region. I think that this has become almost a norm. And it's not just political parties. It's also third parties, it's also state and non-state actors, it's web portals and social media have been really systematically abused. I do believe that we should protect the right of free media by allowing people to create new media outlets. But as with the traditional media, I think ownership and transparency of ownership is what will help us go through the maze of portals in search of the truth. When it comes to the EU, I fully agree with what was mentioned here, that EU has been strategically present in the region. They have even paid the bill for many things. And in the same time, they have not created the influence that goes along. And this is because the EU was still used to a situation of 20 years ago, when in the traditional media landscape, they were able to operate and send that message very, very easily. We all come from countries, most of the countries in the region, that had very strong support for the EU, maybe one or two countries minus. What we have seen in the last years is a significant deterioration, first in the confidence in our institutions, but also deteriorating trends when it comes to the confidence in the EU. And these two trends are equally worrying. So I do believe that the EU should present its policies in a more strategic manner, and with more coordination and discussion with some of the pro-democratic forces in the different countries. It's not necessarily just institutions, it's political parties, it's NGOs, it's citizens, it's youth movements, etc. And I do believe that some of the good ideas, for example, like the committee created in the European Parliament, could be one of the proposals that the Parliament offers to the parliaments in the region. If it works there, it could work here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So from media ownership to other things that we've heard in presentations, hopefully Jerakina might provide a few more ideas that are circling around Brussels on what would be the expectations from the decision makers. Do we have you here, Jerakina, still?
Yes, Jelena, I'm here. I could just echo what Madam Shekerinska said, but I have to use a quote of a good friend of mine: European Union has Ronaldo and Messi, but never wins a championship. Why? Because of the visibility and because of the approach. EU should be more outspoken, should go out with simplistic words, but be more present. I just have to deviate conversation with just a simple example, what happened last week in the region. Belgrade and Pristina were visited by a big delegation from overseas who were promoting investment in the projects that are already paid by European Union. many of them. How this was revealed? Only because a journalist asked EU after several days whether these projects are being invested. And then when we asked for follow-up of the information, it took them days to give us back feedback. In present days is too far long. It's too long. It's forgotten story. So EU should be more outspoken. It should not be shy because it's doing a big work there. It pays bills. It has the moral responsibility towards the region, and nevertheless, it's not visible. So demand the ownership of the media, ask for more presence in the media, and invest in the mainstream media, in professional media that will go on with traditional fact-checking in the newsrooms.
And if I may add to that, it's not only the visibility of European investments that needs to be raised, but also visibility of European ambassadors, various ambassadors that need to be raised as well. Hopefully, regarding media literacy, we can hear final words from Miko Salo. What would be your suggestions toward decision makers regarding media and information literacy as a systematic approach on the EU level?
I think on the resources side, it's to getting serious. I mean, those resources are not immense, but at the same time, I would go for the structural things and be tough to the platforms on that one, because that's where it gets, and try to get them on board. We have to remember that still, when we are talking about the platforms, we are talking about the US that are still engaging in discussions. Then we got Russian and Chinese platforms that we don't unfortunately have any control. So with those one, of course, we have to be especially careful. But I mean, that's probably the structural things that one can do. And I mean, outside that, I mean, show example, live up to the values. I tend to listen a lot of the talk in Brussels with different kind of hats, and being inside the administration, at times it was the value talk was a little bit like here and there. But I have to say that at the moment, it's really, we are living in serious times, and showing example and being, that's probably the best thing. Then a small point, probably a point to one of the questions there on the traveling disinformation. There is a promising thing, of course, that the institutions and different actors are trying to enhance the cooperation in between the countries. And we have a very interesting example from the fact checkers called Coronavirus Fact Alliance. That is actually as a material. There's one website, and I think Christina is later here to tell about that one. But as such, I mean, that opens eyes. We have used it as a tool. You got like 8,000 different coronavirus fact checks, and just the variety of nonsense that there is. I mean, it's eye-opening as such. And then there are some interesting European efforts to come, like European Digital Media Observatory or something like that, because it's very often the same nonsense, just having a little bit like local adaptations, and we should pool our resources for that type of thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Miko, for mentioning both situations. Let's see, for the end, Anna-Katarina, would you have any suggestions on future decision-making regarding online disinformation and how to fight it?
Yes, thank you for the question. I would say it's really extremely important to have like digital literacy campaigns for adults. It's something we always forget about, but it's the adults who share disinformation online the most, and they didn't learn it in school. So I would really shift the focus on that very specific problem. And we often forget that it's not more information that is needed, because people feel like they are drowning in an information flood. So it's not about giving more information, it's about helping people process the information flood. It's helping people filtering the reliable sources, the trustworthy institutions. And I would say it's also important to regulate the platforms to really help people sorting out the relevant and reliable informations they can get.
Thank you. Regulation is something to be seen in the future from the European institutions. Hopefully, the institutions, political institutions in our region will follow on to that and continue cooperation where necessary. I use this opportunity to thank you, to say a big thank you to all the panelists for sharing your knowledge, your experiences, good and bad, and your emotions on this very important topic. Wish you all good luck in your future endeavors. Somehow I have a feeling that we'll be meeting quite a few times in the future and networking, because the problem is here to stay, and we're here to stay to fight it. So thank you, with some optimism, because simply we are communicating more than we did 6 months ago. There should be some changes to be expected. Thank you to the organizers. And at this point, I just ask for understanding from the audience that did have some very specific questions, but hopefully Miko, Angelikina, and Shekerinska did provide some answers to the questions. And hopefully in the future, we'll have more time and focus on the specifics of different Western Balkan countries. So whether the organizers wish to join us at this moment, I'm not sure. But if not, thank you to everyone. Stay well, stay safe, and sometimes stay devices off. Thank you.